Gone are the days carrying a super thick wallet stuffed with cash. Right now, with just a phone, I can handle all my payments thanks to digital banks. It is super convenient, but how safe is it for users? Hello, cyber citizen. I'm your tech lady, and welcome into the Cyberverse, your favorite cybersecurity podcast. And today, I'm so happy to have here with me two gentlemen from digital bank world. This is Jonas, the CEO, and Hua Nguyen, the head of infrastructure and CISO of T-Mobile Digital Bank. Hi.
Hi.
Are you ready?
Yes.
If you are ready, let's go.
Into the cyberverse.
Okay, let's break the ice first with a challenge for both of you. I know that you are not only colleagues but also competitors sometimes, right? And the challenge is really fun that we have a series of 11 questions, and your task is easy. That try to be the first to answer the questions, and each answer will give you 1 point, and at the end of the section we will see who gets a higher point. And if you want to answer, just so try to be the first one who rings the bell. Okay, so shall we go?
Okay, let's go.
Okay, catch my question as quickly as possible. What's your name?
Jonas.
What nationality are you?
German.
Between two of you, who has been with T-Mobile longer?
You gotta hit it.
You can ring the
You
bell
went
to him.
first. So polite. Okay, let's be first.
Who's longer?
Me.
Okay. Can you explain what T-Mobile is?
You are. Oh wow, you can.
No, you ring the bell and you answer.
You have to answer.
What T-Mobile is?
The T-Mobile is digital bank. That's it.
Okay, cool. In what ways does T-Mobile stand out from other digital banks?
Customer focus and actual driving of value for customers, not only for the bank.
Oh, cool. And how many authentication factors does T-Mobile app have? He's counting.
Of course I'm counting, because there's different types, right? There's a lot of different ones.
Yeah.
Ring the bell first.
Okay. I think three.
Three
Yeah.
factors.
Yeah.
At least.
What are they?
The user, the password is something you are, and the second one is the proof who you are, like a biometric authentication. The last one is the we are like to secure them like encrypt them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And how many digital bank accounts do you personally manage?
One.
Just T-Mobile?
Yeah.
Wow. Which of your bank accounts do you find yourself using most frequently? It's super easy.
T-Mobile.
Have you personally ever experienced any online security threats?
Of course, all the time there are phishing attacks and people trying to get login information. So yeah,
How do you try to get your login information?
whether it is different emails, different links, fake sign-in pages, all of that.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, obviously remain vigilant and know that if it doesn't go through the T-Mobile app, and if it's different strategies, of course. So if it's a funky looking link or something, of course, always only trust through the app. So, or if it looks like a very weird email, I've sent him emails before asking, hey, this doesn't really look real. What do you think?
Yeah.
The last question, what's more important to you, security or convenience?
If we have to avoid the security, we have to improve more layer. The more layer we have, and the more inconvenient to the user. Like we have to prove to say you are any. The proof you are any. Yeah, more layer. That's why more inconvenient.
So which one is more important for you? Which one do you
We
choose?
have to balance.
Balance?
Balance. Yeah.
It's like the answer of a Miss competition, you know. It's a beauty competition, but you're like, you could give it balance. Okay, that's amazing that we can see that obviously, our CEOs is the winner for more bell rings, right? You know.
I love ringing the bell.
Okay, thank you a lot. It's a good start. I got a little bit information about you too, and we are going to dive deeper into both of you and into Timo in the next section. Okay, let's talk about latest news. Are there any recent incident in Vietnam or around the world that surprised you the most, and why? Both of you.
Every single day there are certain incidents all around the world in Vietnam. The thing that maybe originally was surprising to me, but now is unfortunately more disappointing than surprising, is just how much energy, how many people out there spend on trying to break into systems. At the same time, I guess it makes sense if you think about it. A bank is where a lot of the money is. If you are trying to get a lot of money, where would you go? Who would you try to attack? Of course, it's the bank. The level of technical skills, of course, it goes from, we all know the Nigerian prince's scam emails from 15 years ago that are very, very easy to spot. But if you look at some of the more sophisticated attacks today, if you look at, for example, card protocols and fraudulent POS terminals that issue seemingly valid messages, and it's almost impossible for any player at the end of it to identify that this actually came from a fraudulent or from a hacked device. That level of sophistication, I think, is just something that, on the one hand, surprised me earlier on, but the more that we see, I guess, the more we just accept it.
Over the past few years, banking has changed dramatically. The fintech company has, handle the large volume of the sensitive data, financial data, like the very important, like banking information, like credit card information, financial history, transaction, everything. That's the data is highly valuable on the black market, making the organization either lucrative or impact to the cyber criminal.
So I see you mentioned a lot about customer focus. You care a lot about your customer, and as me as an observer, I do see what you are doing with your customer, and I am really interested in your Tommy character, the one that you build to be the assistant for your customer, right? And one of the things that I see Tommy usually mention for your audience, your users, that people usually borrow each other's Timo accounts. Why do you borrow each other's Timo accounts, and how do you address with the issue?
I think it's less borrowing Timo accounts. It's more of a general problem that people, it's very easy now in Vietnam to open a bank account. Obviously, eKYC means that in theory, anybody can very easily open a bank account. But the problem is that if you don't have your identity card with you or whatever, you may have somebody else just sign up because you didn't go back to your hometown yet, pick up the latest documents. So you'll just have somebody, a friend, open up a bank account for you and use it for convenience. Now, of course, that's a very, very dangerous practice, because in theory that means you're letting somebody else use your identity, and banking transactions, of course, can be very, very sensitive. Which is why also some of the newer regulations that are coming in place, 2, 3, 4, 5, around biometric authentication and all of that, are going to massively clamp down on that. But I think back to your question around Tomi, one of the reasons why we introduced Tomi is because we felt that the funny thing is money is actually something very, very emotional. Because if I ask you, you don't need to answer it, but I'm guessing that you dream of being richer, or at least not having to worry about money. And I guess you are scared of a day where you need money but don't have money. So it's something very, very, very emotional. But actually in this whole discussion, banks historically have been very bad at connecting emotionally with the customer. And it's very hard for a big bank to actually take this more human, this more emotional connection. Even for somebody like Timo, of course, we try and be much more approachable and much more customer focused, but still for Timo to say something or to create a mascot like Tomi, a character which helps almost like one of us being a customer, and of course whether it comes around cybersecurity and these kind of responsible practices. But Tommy also talks a lot about money management and kind of lifestyle and how finance fits into that lifestyle. So this is kind of our attempt to try and make it a little bit more approachable and resonate with the customer base in these very, very important but also somehow very uncomfortable discussions.
That's why you say that Timo is talking about love, not only money. It's very impressive. Another thing that I see Tommy also tell people that do not share your login information to anyone, even bank staff. So it's related to phishing attacks, as you mentioned before. The previous episode of Into the Cyberverse, our guest, Hill PC, already told that phishing is the second common cyber threat, cyber attacks globally. So it is the global threat. Then how are you dealing with the phishing attacks for your customers? Not only trying to tell people that, hey, don't do that. So do you have any other strategy to prevent the risk?
Oh, okay. This is a very interesting question. Basically, the human's error is the first thing that make the cause of the attack, like the human error. So everything, no matter what the how advanced of the security measure the company is implement, the user and the customer behavior is very important. That's why we're building the clearly communication via email, via website. All communication are detailed, transparent, and easy to understand, to making them how to avoid the scammer. That's very important. And we have the support channel to support the customer, and when they have an incident, we have a channel. And the last thing that into the system, the Timo system, we have built this based on the three very important elements. That we have people, we have the technology and process, and we build from that three elements to. We building and protect the very important, like a confidential, integrity, and availability of the customer data. We building to protect that the CIA. We call it CIA triad. So training to education to user how to avoid the scammer is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do agree that we need to raise their awareness about how to protect themselves online. And about cybersecurity. But there is something that I observe real life right now, that you see that, like me personally, every single day I receive a lot of text messages from many different organizations to say that do not share your login information, your password, or anything to anyone else but you, so forth and so on. But the more messages I receive, I also see the more incidents that I can see every day, that people lost their credentials, people lost the money due to the password hack, so forth and so on. Then there is some argument that right now banks are putting the biggest gap to the user, with the responsibility to the user that they need to protect their credentials. But we know that, for example, passwords or OTP, they have been lasting for like nearly 1 century, right? Like over 60 years, 6 decades. Then hackers already have a lot of tactics and a lot of ways to bypass your OTP, to take your password. Many people are thinking that right now banks still put the responsibility to protect their credential, to protect their assets, to protect their data and information online to their users. But bank can do better. How do you think about that assumption?
I think it's similar to what Kwa said in terms of course, whatever technology and process we do, of course we do a lot of work behind the surface in order to protect, in order to identify suspicious logins, transactions, alerts, all of that, devices that are registered. And I think, of course, this is a constant, actually key area for us to invest into. I think what's important is to realize that if a customer is not aware or is not actually clear on what risky practices are, then all of this is almost worthless. So I think to your point, it's actually very, very important, and a lot of institutions are famous for they'll have you sign 20 pages of legal paragraphs, and in the end, and we even see this with certain banks here that will have fraud cases, internal fraud, but in the end, for 10 years, it's in front of court around is the bank actually liable or not, because technically the bank may have not forced the customer to sign something, but somewhere deep down in the legal paperwork they disclaimed their responsibility away. That's of course not something that is, in my view, a responsible practice. But I think the flip side of this is simply that it's, as Kwa said, a holistic, different elements coming together, and we, at least at T-Mo, definitely don't think that we can just tell the customer, it's your problem, that's totally wrong. But we do need the support of the customer as well in order for all of us together to work.
Cool. You have just mentioned the decision 2345 from the State Bank of Vietnam. Is it affect anything of your technology and your authentication stuff and preparation and process in T-Mo banking due to that decision?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're day and night now.
This regulation is regulation that 2345 is a motivation for the banking for building the applied AI for biometric identification. So in the T-Mo, that's something like a significant change on the flow, on the security a little bit, but overall that improve the safety for the customer. Well, like you say, that something, the banking, a chain, the banking, I need to borrow your banking account. After July, there no any happen again, because you had to prove you are by the biometric verification with the every single information will go through the MPS, right? MPS and SPB together to verify that you are. You have to prove it. There is no way to exchange or borrow again.
Okay.
Again.
Related to authentication, we have three main kind of authenticate. It is related something you know, like password, OTP, so forth and so on. It's something you know. It's something you have, like you have a phone, you have a security key, you have the app, for example. So you can know the other secret, you can know the other password, you can borrow the password and you can apply the password. You can even borrow the phone or the app or the account, but the last side of authentication factor, it is something you are. It's like your biometric, fingerprint, facial recognition, and it's very difficult for you to borrow the fingerprint or the facial recognition of the other, unless it is your husband or your wife or the one who is really close to you. It's like the only hacker that you need to be aware of is your closest ones. Then that's what Hua is trying to explain, that with the decision 2345, we can prevent a lot of kind of phishing attack and the issue of borrowing accounts of the others, so the data can be protected much.
You're about right.
I think that in the decision 2345, they also mentioned biometric or FIDO as the option of authenticate. So do you have like any experience with FIDO, and how do you fight FIDO?
Yeah, passwordless, right? The FIDO is stand for passwordless solution. So we're working on that. We are improving the embedding for FIDO. We want to try to move toward to improve something of FIDO as SDK. FIDO is improve in the LF. It's not something like a device to put into your computer and the password or passkey or something to need to verify via the USB. It's not something like that. We integrate it into the LF to provide a password-based solution for a customer. You don't have to remember the password anymore.
Cool. So because it's a little bit different between biometric and FIDO password-less authentication thing, it will give you the same experience, user experience, that you just use your fingerprint. But just biometric itself is a little bit different from the biometric in FIDO technology.
Yeah, the FIDO
Like,
is something you have, and the
I-
biometric is something you are.
Actually, that right now, like what you say about you integrate the FIDO into your app, we call it passkey and we call it like synced passkey. We have
Okay.
device passkey, like for example, a security key that you lock it into your computer, or you have the sync passkeys, mean that you use the biometric in your phone, on your app to log in. The same experience, but the technology is a little bit different because like FIDO is due to the public key cryptography. Like most of the banks right now, they are doing underlying biometrics. It means that right now, for some bank that I'm using on my phone, I do not need to type my password anymore. I just use my fingerprint. But actually, that after using my fingerprint, the system automatically collect my password and my username to send it to the server for me to log in. It's still the same technology, and the biometric is just trying to help me feel a little bit more confident, but the security thing is still the same.
Yep, I agree. Yeah.
To your point, you just mentioned the login experience, for example. Passwords are notoriously hard for users to remember. And to your earlier point around banks putting the pressure on customers, it's not just banks, it's pretty much any login service for the longest time loves saying, well, it's not really our problem because just come up with a 24 character, all special, change it every week, you're so safe, your problem. Now, that may be somewhat secure, but of course that's very, very inconvenient.
Yep.
But you mentioned login with fingerprint, for example. That is quite convenient. It's actually very convenient. And that's good for business. And that's more secure than even a 24 character random password that, because nobody can ever remember it, writes on a little note and sticks it under the desk, and then the cleaning lady sees that. And so from that perspective, I think actually it's easy, and a lot of companies look at them as contradictory. But I don't think actually that's the right way to look at it, because at the end of the day, which business are we in? We may talk a bit about love and customer experience and all of that, but fundamentally T-Mo is in a trust business. Because if you don't trust T-Mo, are you going to put your money with us? Of course not. So no matter how much you love us, no matter how cool Tomi is, no matter how great the app is, if fundamentally you don't trust T-Mo, you're not going, it's a terrible business for us. And you can actually see this with certain fintechs that are very cool, but ultimately their practices are not aligned with trust building. So if we look at that, security is a key in the driver for trust.
So well, at first I saw a little bit difference between the point of view from Hua and you, because at the beginning of our talk, Hua already told me that the more security, maybe the less convenient. But now I see that we can like have both, right? We don't need to choose one. We can have both of them because like you said, the base of T-Mo is the security to build trust, and the trust would have you to have better business for your customer and for your user. You have just mentioned about functions. Then one function of T-Mo apps that I'm really interested in, that you introduced it at the beginning of this year, it is the function for the user can gather many other users together to have a pool that they have the same investment, the same kind of money together, and they can manage the money together. I can share the pool, the money investment, or how to say pocket, with my boyfriend, for example, my family, my friend, my relatives. It's pretty nice, and I haven't seen that type of function before in other kind of banks. And how do your user respond to this function so far?
It's quite an interesting feature because it's part of, I think, two big beliefs that we have around banking. One, we already touched upon the emotional difficulty, but the second piece is actually the social aspect of it. Because, of course, there is personal banking, but what is the most popular use case for this shared money pot. It's couples. It's husband and wife. So historically, what would happen? Historically, as we all know, the Vietnamese husband, you know where this is going.
I am.
He knows it very, very well. How happy are you about your money?
Super.
Of course, for the record, he is very happy that he sends his money to his wife every month, and that's gone. So, of course, to be clear here, what we're doing is not really for pooled investments. It is more for groups of people, whether it is friends or primarily couples, to have a source of money that both have transparency on how that money is being used for certain, if they go traveling together, or my wife and I, we, for example, have 3 joint couple pots. One for our household expenses, which is rent, bills, basic things there. One for our eating out together, fancy eating, dining, when we enjoy and splurge, and one for traveling. And so because both of us have set Timo up in a way that every month we simply contribute the same amount into that, and whether she pays something, whether I pay from it, we have transparency and accountability. And again, if we talk about safety and all of that, actually instead of me handing over money to some treasurer friend or whatever and no idea where it will go, it actually creates more visibility whilst being under the same secure framework of a banking kind of environment. So it's interesting because, of course, figuring out, again, exactly to your earlier point, how to balance the convenience and the security and transparency was a key challenge in building this feature, but it's been a very, very popular and a lot of resonance from a lot of Vietnamese husbands. But in fairness, even wives, because who enjoys arguing over what happened to the money?
Yeah.
Cool.
Just one thing that I want to share with the Jonah's opinion, like the ultimate goal on the money pot sharing, right? That we enrich the life. We enrich the life. Why I say that? Because we had into we set the target. We had to save in one, for example, like we had to save in 10 million this month, right? We had to build a strategy, how to share the part, how to save in the money to pay for internet, electricity, water, everything. We share the pot together. We paid via the sharing pot, the pot sharing. With everything is transparent. We moving forward to see how saving we are, how saving money every month. That's good. That's really, really good. I have no experience on another bank like that. I'm not a Timonian, like I want to say that, but that feature is very cool.
I agree.
And then security and this perspective that, we do it pen testing, we do the penetration, we do the update, the regulation every annually, every year to secure the way we are, the way we produce the product. Okay.
I agree with you because I already told you that I never seen such type of function
You have
before
to
in
try after
other
this show.
things. But like personally, because you are a husband and a Vietnamese husband, the typical ones, as what Jonah said. Jonah already has his experience with his wife and his 3 Timo pots. So how about your experience with that? Are you happier than before with that function, your couple life?
I like it all. I'm super happy.
Happier than before?
I'm super happy. The tour from the banking that they helped me a lot to saving money. That's very easy, simple.
Saving money and saving arguments, fights, which is very,
right?
It's actually very funny that if you look even at this conversation, he's talking about product, I'm talking about security for the same feature. So you can see how our view is, it's not kind of a fight. It is rather how do you figure out how to create something that is convenient and safe, because both together, and the security, both immediate short term as well as long term, because the other dirty secret around security and trust and all of that is obviously you can be very, very secure 99% of the times, but one incident is all it takes.
Security is not something hacking, right? Not a bad way we're talking about security as someone hacking, right? Someone hacking. No, something about the data. Your data is someone to selling them to another company. I don't know. We don't know. But Timor, we take that the highest priority. Timor, we are proud to say that Timor is the first digital bank to achieve the PCI DSS version 4 first bank in Vietnam. That we are proud to say that because the version 4 at the highest level is very hard, very tough for to achieve it. We have to prove that a lot of the mechanism, algorithm, encryption, a lot of things to do to achieve that certification.
Can you please explain a little bit about the certificate? What is it about, and what is it for?
Okay. The PCI DSS version 4 is the payment industry international standard that's applied for every single bank who operates the banking operation, transaction, and credit card. That's why we apply the PCI DSS. Every bank in Vietnam must do the same too. That to commit the security, the transaction in a secure way, comply with the internal standard. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back a little bit about what Jonas have just said, that for being rich, it's not about like investing. It's also about how to manage your money, how to spend it, how to save it, so forth and so on. I see a lot of couples and even the old people, they spend their whole life of spending money together and they spend the whole life to have some savings. But many of them face incidents that all the money that they spend for their whole life lost in the hand of the bad ones. In some like scam attack, because we see so many different kind of scam right now online. We see on news channels every single day, hundred of million Vietnam dong or even billion Vietnam dong lost in the hands of the black hat hacker, and even the one who have a lot of information and knowledge, like authorities, like celebrities, like economists, on the news channel, they lost all the money on the hand of the black one. Then because me, like a very naive user, I see that it's very difficult for bank and even for the user to manage their money themselves, to manage their asset online. So is it difficult for you, like Timor, because you have the management system, the management function to manage money of many people together, like a sharing, investment sharing part together? Is this a challenge in the security part to manage that data, that asset online?
So I think there's a lot to unpack here, but just for the audience's sake, to be clear, our shared money pot functionality allows you to invite up to 6 people. So in total 6, owner and 5 more. So we're not talking about big groups of hundreds of people pooling money together. Transactions and the way that everything ultimately is regulated is of course under the banking framework of SBV, meaning that any transaction that you do from one of those accounts is of course ultimately authenticated exactly the same way, including, for example, even when we now talk about 2, 3, 4, 5 moving forward, if it is an at-risk transaction that has a higher level of authentication, it doesn't matter whether it would be coming from a shared or from a personal pot, it will require the same kind of authentication, of course. I think when we talk about, ironically, a lot of the scams that individuals fall victim of, to me there's 2 different types. There is targeting individuals, and then there's systemic cyber security incidents where people actually target the bank, the database, try and drain that. This second part, of course, and we all know that incidents like that have happened and regularly happen with banks all around the world. And this shouldn't really be of concern to the consumer because it's ultimately about the bank, not about you individually, especially if you work with regulated parties, which is very, very important because whilst we tend to be quite bold and innovative when it comes to things like brand and positioning and the layer on top, when it comes to the financial product layer, we're actually very, very conservative because we only work with regulated products, which is very important because when we talk about the individual, a lot of the scams happen when people get tricked into certain products that are either unregulated or where greed or fear is being ultimately leveraged. And sometimes if I look at it as a consumer, whether I'm being targeted with a scam, which is truly criminal, or in some cases, a lot of these are also actually people who legitimately believe, give me $1 billion dong because I've got this fantastic business opportunity and I'll give you 2 billion dong in 12 months. Nonsense, but this kind of consumer education, and this is exactly the same discussion as all the way back to the beginning. As a bank, of course, we have a responsibility to try and educate the customer as much as possible, not just on the security part, but even on what is realistic to expect or not. And this is 2-3 years ago, there was a lot of hype around wealth products and a lot of crazy interest rates returns being promised. We made a very conscious decision 2-3 years ago to stay away from that strategically because it would be wrong of us to create the impression that as a customer you can safely expect 30% returns on an investment product. It's not even a scam per se in terms of cyber fraud or anything, it's just a very high risk and wrong thing to try and promote to people. So again, we come back to this education that mean you should probably step back and think twice before giving somebody all your life savings or your app password or whatever.
You have just mentioned fake job and investment scam. It's a super popular kind of scam right now so far. Then it's a little bit, remind me, so Tmall usually encourage people to do tasks and challenge, right?
Gamification.
So, gamification. The thing is that I'm wondering, have you ever faced the challenge that people mistaken you for such kind of scam? Because you also do gamification, you also do like doing some challenge and task for having returns. Then do you ever find that situation? How do you address these situations?
So one very important thing are points and a lot of gamification is not leading to higher interest rates or to financial rewards. So what we do with gamification is we try and encourage healthy financial habits. But if you look at, and this is again almost internal secrets, but if you look at Tmall Points, for example, we don't use Tmall Points to calculate who are our richest customers. That's how most businesses would do it. But actually we want to look at who are our most engaged customers because that's the ones where we have the best ability to help educate them. We recently did a cashless challenge, for example, where people would get badges if they reduce their ATM withdrawals because, of course, cash has a lot of advantages but also many, many disadvantages. So encouraging digital transactions which tend to be safer, which tend to have a lower footprint and all of that. So I think we're not really looking at this as the gambling and tapping into people's greed, which is what a lot of these scams do, but rather how do we use these kind of mechanisms to help people explore that better and to educate ultimately themselves also better.
I see that you're under a lot of pressure, not only the pressure from the regulation, like Decision 2345, for example, the pressure from your boss with all about the information of the business, innovation, ideas, so forth and so on. The pressure from the user and the customer, like me and like all the others one. And for sure, the pressure of you yourself about technology things, because you want to adopt a lot of new things like machine learning, as you mentioned, AI, and like you have a lot of data from your customer and user. It's like the very big things that your infrastructure need to handle with, and it is not easy for the infrastructure to handle all the things together. Then can you make it a little bit more detailed and specific about what is the most difficult part of your technical team in terms of what we introduced from the very beginning of this talk, all about the trust, all about the security, all about the function that we have just mentioned. What is the most difficult part that you are dealing with every day?
The most difficult? The technical in the like in the world right now, it change often change every day, every moment. We have to up to date the technology and the training to adapt with the business strategy. That's the most difficult thing, I think.
About the change.
The change, because
How to change.
Yeah, the change of the way we handle something is sensitive information. We have to change, often change. We do the we do the diligence, due care every day, every single time. That's a difficult thing.
I think now is bad. I hope you're not going to walk out when I say that the pressure on you on security is not going to change. It's never going to change. Right? Building trust now or building trust 10 years ago. I signed up for a bank in Germany almost 20 years ago. And back then, OTPs were sent by mail. And then people would intersect the mail with a password, username, and then the OTP a few days later, and could make transactions. And because you could actually feel on the letter what type of a letter that was because of the way that the OTPs were sealed, actually quite easy. So this was 20 years ago, and I'm sure in 20 years from now, we will be using other methods and mediums to interact with money and financial services, but you'll still have the same fundamental issue that bad actors want your money. Bad actors want your data. How they get it will change, but the underlying battle, I think it's important not to see this as a project. Because whenever we think of security as a project, that means after 12 months we have a successful project and him and I go to the beach and celebrate that we're done with this project, great. I think in Vietnam what may be different to other markets is the general awareness and the level of cyber threats originating from Vietnam is relatively high in comparison to the overall economic size and development state. So unfortunately in some areas bad actors are way overrepresented in Vietnam, which I think is unfortunately a side effect of a very fortunate situation that Vietnam has a lot of tech talent.
Okay, just turn back a little bit about you said about what he's and his team doing is trying to grow the infrastructure as quickly as possible, adapt to the change as what you said, but not growing and increasing the cost. So what is your secret? What is your secret sauce for that?
Him.
That's not really a secret. That's a lot about the clouding technology we are using right now. That is comprehensive clouding system. They very scalability and availability, the most availability on the world right now. For example, we have the increase. Let's say that the peak time for using for some product or feature We have a lot of the, connection to the system, the user, the connection to the system, like a million. We have to scale it. In the traditional way, we had to waiting for a week to scale up system. But the cloud system we are using right now is just about 15 minutes. That's adaptive. We adapted to the requirement from the business. Yeah, we're proud to build that system in nowadays.
Okay. May I ask how many staff are there in your Tmall?
About 250.
250.
250, right.
Okay, 250 because you are so this is your question that I know that we have been talking a lot about security and trust for customer, but security is not only for outsider but also for insider, for all the stuff.
Yes.
For all. So how do you make sure that all the 250 staff of your Tmall are applying and doing and following all the best security practice and measure every day to protect their own data, to protect company data, and not to be an insider threat?
Okay. One thing that we recognize that we are building the human firewall into the single employee. How we do it? So we utilize the top one, like the best one in training the user awareness platform. The word to build a platform to the user, to every day to training to how to avoid the phishing email, how to recognize the malicious link, and how to not to download the harmful software, to how to recognize that the phishing email. Actually, that we did the training program to pretend the CEO email. Like I say, we do the fiction to do internal fiction. Like Jonathan want to say this file immediately, urgent. I need it now. Is somebody that called is that Jonathan? You need this. You make late right now. What happened? I do not. I don't want it. Who told you? You sent to me. You sent to me an email.
I didn't know this when he ran that exercise.
Because the
wasn't
CEO
aware.
for us, phishing is very like publicly in the world right now. They pretend the CEO name to scam people. We doing the training every month, every quarter, every year, and we do the phishing. We to train the people how to recognize that the phishing. At the end of the day, we build the employee in the Tmall in the human firewall. That's the goal. Yeah.
I really like your term, human firewall.
Yeah, human firewall. Because at the end of the day, the human's error is the first defend. The first defend. Who the daily work every day. Who receive the call, who receive the chatting, who receive the email every day. Human. It's not system, right? The human, like us. We receive every day. If we don't train them, how can they avoid them, right? Very important.
So now I see your very one common rule for security and trust is not only about your technical and infrastructure,
absolutely.
but it's also about human firewall for not only your staff but also for your user. And that's why Tommy is trying so hard for educating user about cybersecurity and how to protect themselves online and their asset online, how to have a balanced life and richer life, as what you said. So during 9 years, have you ever faced real incident that because of an insider threat that you have to struggle a lot about cybersecurity?
We did. For example, like you have a computer, right? And you have a local admin, you get a full administrator to download everything from internet, and you download it and install it into your computer. In some way, its software itself is not harmful, but the key or something you need to crack them. And the cracked stuff have the malware somewhere. The malware is something clears your password. When you type in the password on your keypad and lock everything and send it to the server attacker. That's for example. It stay there for a long time, but we don't know. How we know that we have to implement the behavioral activity and user awareness. And let's say, do not download, do not install anything you don't trust. You ask IT. Yeah, that is something.
I am curious about what you have just said, your incident response process. Then I really want to know a little bit clearer about your response process. Can you like give me some example, the real example of that? Okay, you got this incident. What is the incident, and how do you respond to it step by step? For the other to know a little bit clearer, and for the other to learn from your experience.
Yeah, that about the process. We have to just clearly on the high level. So we identify, if we see the rig, we see the incident, we identify the rig, identify the incident, identify what is this incident, where the incident, what time, when the incident, and categorize them. And the more important thing, the container, contain the incident. You don't want to depress any deeper in the system, right? To contain them, stop them. And next step, we eradicate it. We eliminate it, and after that, we recover the system and we document. We took the root cause analysis and lesson learned, the pause, and something like that in the life cycle for incident response. And the incident response that we are following the framework of the ISO 27001 2012 and the BCID as well. That's the framework.
Okay, alright, cool. We have been talking a lot about your user experience, about how do you train and educate your user, not only outside the user customer, but also inside the user yourself. And because we are talking about trusting digital bank, it's amazing that we're talking a lot about how T-Mobile is building trust for your user and how do you define trust. And I know that because you are T-Mobile and you love to do gamification and challenges for your user. And now we are doing a special podcast also, and our audience also want to have some challenge. Do you have any special challenge for our audience? This is your camera.
So one of the features, actually our head of growth, who is a very creative, non-traditional financial services person, he did something very interesting a while back. All transactions on T-Mobile automatically get classified and tagged as a type of transaction. But of course you can also, and that helps with tracking and all that, but of course you can also create custom tags. The normal tags, the system tags that we have are things like food and drink, shopping, rent, entertainment, or whatever. But what he did is he actually created a couple of categories of highly happy spending, bit happy spending, bit unhappy spending, and highly regretful spending. And so he ran that for a week, and then he looked at our little chart which shows you what is a breakdown of the money you spend, and how much of the money that he spent was he happy about having spent, and how much was he unhappy about having spent. And this kind of playing around, don't change your life necessarily yet, or your behavior or any of that, but just this kind of, again, using something like digital banking to better understand your lifestyle and becoming, it's almost a little bit esoteric, but becoming a bit better person by minimizing that regretful spending, understanding, wait a second, if I regret that, why did I do that? Avoid it next time. So that could be a small little fun thing that any T-Mobile customer actually can immediately do.
It's amazing. It's not only about digital bank, it's also about lifestyle, and it's about how you spend your money. So we have 4 types of spending, like what Jonah have just said. Highly happy spending, right? Happy spending, unhappy spending, and super grateful spending. You can apply this type of activity right now, here and now, to see how you spend your money. And it is a very good advice also from Jonas and from T-Mobile and from Khoa also, to how do you be richer, as what they have been said from the very first start. It's very amazing having you here today, talking a lot about trust, digital bank, about being richer. So I think that our audience is also happy enough and richer enough after our conversation today, because not only they get some knowledge about security, but also how to be richer truly in your life from the point of view of Timo is amazing. Thank you a lot for being here, Jonas and Cora.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thank you very
Any
much.
other last word to the audience? It's your last chance.
Stay safe and live richer.
Stay safe and live richer.